On episode 253 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to Boldt DeKoch and Phil Clampitt, and they're going to tell you why servant leadership is just service level. And if you want to be a leader who truly cares, then you need to go deeper. That's right, folks. We're going beyond servant leader today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and it's so good to have you here. And today we are diving into what it means to be beyond a servant leader, which is pretty interesting when you think about it, because I remember probably a couple of years ago how servant leadership was all the rage of the time. I mean, it was all about being a servant leader, serving this, serving that, serving leader, serving leader, serving leader. And here we have Bob and Phil coming on the show, and they're going to talk to you about why that's just surface level. And it's not really getting deep to being a leader. And you know, as leaders, that's where we need to get to really connect with our people. So that's why I had them on the show. That's why you're going to be listening to them. And here's a few statistics, which are just shockers. And this comes right out of their book. Gallup recently released that only 15% of employees in the U.S. are truly engaged in their workplace, yet nearly 70% employees say they would work harder if they felt more appreciated. Over 90% of employees surveyed believe that their leadership, i.e. the people, lacked communication skills to lead. These are horrible statistics. And I guess in some regards, that's shocking to me, because this is why I do what I do. These statistics are the reason why I do this, to make sure that you do not be part of those statistics. That you, as a leader and not a boss, are on the other side of the coin and being one of the ones that is being praised, and that people are ready and willing to follow. So that is the topic today. That, ladies and gentlemen, is setting the stage. So you know what? That's enough for me. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation about being beyond a servant leader with Boldt DeKoch and Phil Clampitt. Gentlemen, welcome to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It's so good to have you both here today.
Well, Scott, we're very happy to be with you today. Very exciting.
It's very exciting to be with you too as well.
Awesome. So we got Bob, we got Phil. Gentlemen, I want to lead the show off with a quote which was actually in the pitch you flicked over, or your publicist flicked over to me. And that is that Gallup recently reported only 15% of employees in the U.S. are truly engaged in their workplace, yet nearly 70% of employees say they would work harder if they felt more appreciated. And over 90% of employees surveyed believe their leadership, i.e. their supervisors and such, as I read it, lacked communication skills to lead. How the heck did we get here in the first place? Because these statistics are brutal.
Well, they're very brutal, and frankly, this is pre-pandemic statistics. They're worse after that. And this Gallup poll has been going on for a number of years. And if you go back and look, things haven't improved that much over a period of years, even though we work on all of these various leadership models that purport to improve these very things. And 15% engagement, people would work, 70% would work harder if they felt more appreciated. That's all low-hanging fruit. And we saw that, and that along with a lot of the research that we were doing and practice said this has got to be the premise for the book. This has got to be the case for change. Because if the leadership models were working, how in the world would we end up with these kind of numbers? And you put that alongside of the disrespect and cynicism and all that stuff going on, it's just a calamity. The leadership the leadership that we're doing is not engaging people, clearly.
You mentioned the cynicism and disrespect and all those negative things. And the tagline for this show is lead, don't boss. And that is exactly where, my standpoint is coming from too, because I've seen enough of it myself in that, leaders out there just kind of getting, they're climbing the ranks because they're stepping on people's backs to get their advice, taking their people and pushing them up, taking them along. They're using them as the stepping posts and kind of just leaving path of destruction in their wake as they go ahead. And it's just horrible to see. And I have so many bad lessons learned that it's like, I got to do something about this. So you guys wrote a book. I started a podcast. Here we are, hopefully, inspiring people out there to be better leaders today. Now, you guys wrote a book, and it's Leading with Care Beyond Servant Leadership, which is quite interesting to me. So where did the inspiration to go beyond servant leadership come from in the first place?
Well, that's a great question. And I love how you set this up, that the statistics are brutal at this point. And so we thought, servant leadership has been out there for a long, long time. We both went back and reread the original research and the book. And, it said all the right things, but clearly something wasn't working. And so that was when we got the idea, well, maybe we need to go beyond servant leadership and address some of the concerns that have emerged really since that book was written years and years ago. And the two concerns, which I think resonate a lot with what I understand your approach to leadership is all about, is that we have people who maybe have the right sentiments that are expressed in the servant leadership book, and those are the right beliefs, we call them, but they don't know how to do it. And then the people that I've observed, and in some ways, Scott, you probably have as well, it sounds like, are people who have some of the practices, but they really don't have the underlying beliefs or perspective to do it. So, for example, we have people who solicit feedback, but they never really listen to it, and they never really respond to it, and they do what I call faux engagement. And so those are the two kind of twin issues that we were trying to deal with, and why we think we go beyond servant leadership, because we say, hey, you got to start with the right set of beliefs, and you got to know how to practice them, but you also have to have the right practices. If you have these practices, you have to have their underlying beliefs that's going to support those. Otherwise, you're not a genuine person. You're not allowing the real benefits to flow of some of the classic servant leadership ideas.
And I'd add to that, the word care is very intentional in this book, Leading with Care. And that is a much deeper idea, a bigger idea than serving. It goes much further than serving. And so let's maybe take an example of that with a couple of classical jobs. If you walk into a restaurant, you have a waiter that serves you. So they greet you, they ask you if they can get you something to drink, they show you the menu, you make some choices. What would you like, sir or madame? tell us what you want. We're going to serve you today. Contrast that with a healthcare worker whose approach is, how can I help you feel better? What are the problems today that you're facing? What are the physical things that you're going through? And how can the things that I do with you care for that hurt that you have? You wouldn't think of a waiter coming to you and starting to talk about what your dietary requirements are or what your health menu ought to be. And equally, you wouldn't want a nurse to come into your room and give you a menu of things that she's going to serve you. Service is a less substantial idea than caring, and people need to have a sense of caring, and organizations need to have a sense of caring, that their leaders care about the outcomes. So those things all together are how we've positioned this book.
That sounds really interesting to me. So as I hear it, you're essentially saying, and again, this is how I hear it, but servant leadership's kind of superficial, kind of there, one and done per se. Here, what do you need? Okay, I'll take care of you. I'll get you what you want or need. Whereas what you're talking about, leading with care, is that, that deeper need, ensuring that the people are well-being and everything about it is taken care of, to that deeper core level.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
I think it also, Scott, deals with investing in people, that the caring model is really about investing in people. In fact, when Bob and I wrote the book, the first time we got together and he proposed the word caring, I kind of went, no, I don't know if I can live with that word, because it has all these kind of overtones of empathy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I saw people who had faux empathy, and then we started a deeper discussion, and we realized that he was talking about kind of a deep caring, where you're invested in the long term per people that you're out there with. You're trying to be developmentally focused. I think that's why the healthcare worker makes an example. We're looking at long-term lifestyle changes, long-term things that would do to make you more successful and accomplish what you want to accomplish in life. And that's a different kind of caring than just empathy. So it's kind of on top of it. And that's why we called it Beyond. So we had quite a robust debate about the word caring.
You didn't want it to sound too soft and cushy, Phil? Is that it?
No. Well, people mistake it and say, well, you can't care so much. This is a hard-nosed world. Well, the flip side of that is the hard-nosed world is what's causing a lot of the problems. And that's, the two shall meet, but we have to make the two meet in order to get engagement.
That's awesome, actually. I was actually kind of a little bit of a joke, but it set things up pretty nicely, actually, in the next bound here. You said the two shall meet, and that leaders, we do need to care. We do need to look after our people and look after their well-being. And believe me, I personally fundamentally believe this. But at the same time, what I heard from you, Bob, is that we need results too. And this podcast is called the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, where we aim to strive to hit our peak performance of what I call the 3 domains of leadership. And that is leading yourself, i.e. the individual leader, leading your team, i.e. the individuals that make up your team, and then finally leading your organization, i.e. the institution that you work within, work for, or whatever. So with that, now, what are some tactile things that leaders out there can do to start showing that they are a caring leader, go beyond that servant leadership, but dive deeper as what you two gentlemen have been talking about?
Well, there's a chapter in the first part of the book, which is the beliefs part, that talks about making progress and the importance of making progress. That leaders have to move the ball. That's what they're paid to do, expected to do, and need to do for not only the shareholders, but frankly for the employees. They have to make progress so the employees have sustainable employment. In the second part of the book, one of the ways we measure performance is on financial metrics. And it says that caring leaders, there's a practice that says caring leaders are focused on sustainable financial performance. And that means that, in a for-profit company, you've got to make money. In a nonprofit, you've got to break even, but you can't lose money. And in organizations, you got to meet your budgets. And sometimes that requires tough decisions to be made. But if the leader you ask what are the practical things that you can do, when you have to make tough decisions in an organization for financial reasons, the typical model is the CFO and the HR manager and the vice president of finance or the vice president of HR get together in a room, close the door, and decide how many people they're going to get rid of. And then they announce it to the organization. The caring leader would talk to the organization about the problems that they face, about the challenges that they must get over, would educate them on how the financial part of the organization works, and get them at least to understand why the tough decisions need to be made, and ask them in some ways to participate in coming up with ideas to be more cost effective. And that's a big difference than just downloading the decision to the people who have to bear the brunt of it. And yes, some of it hurts people, but you have to make sure that you're keeping the organization going for the long term. So that's two things that we address squarely in the book: the practice as well as the belief in making progress.
Those are awesome points. And so this podcast is something I do on the side right now. It's a passion project of mine. So it's a side hustle. But by day I'm a senior Canadian Army officer. So I was actually giving a presentation, a leadership presentation to a group of students, business students, and I was talking to them, and I said, and make a long story short, basically what I said to them, the job of the military is to save lives. I said, but what's your job? And they're like, make money. I'm like, no, it's to save lives. And I went through this whole rigmarole of, basically their job is to, as if in business, is to make money so that they can turn around and pay their employees a salary, which they turn around and put food on the table for them and their families, therefore saving lives. And it really changed, the viewpoint of a number of students there. And the second point is, I really like what you talked about in that, the financial example that you mentioned there, i.e., often people will sit and, they'll close the door and determine how many employees that they're going to have to let go and stuff like this. I spoke to a CEO of a medium-sized business in 2012-ish timeframe, and I was asking, we were talking about the 2008 financial downturn, which I'm sure you guys will remember, right? The chaos and how bad
Absolutely.
it got, right? And his was a printing business, so they would do flyers and ads and all this stuff, books and magazines and all this. And he told me, he said overnight, literally all of his sales dried up one night. So he walked into work the next morning, said he brought everyone in and said, ladies and gentlemen, it's here, it's hit us. We have no revenue. We have zero forecasted revenue right now.
Yeah.
But no one's going home. We will figure out a way, and we will find a way, and we will get through this. And sure as heck, managed to get through it without laying off a single employee. He said he was pretty scared for a few days, but they were able to do it. So that's a great, real life example to kind of fortify what you're saying. And he told me, like, those employees were so not trustworthy, but like they were so dedicated to him and his company because he turned around and made sure that they all got through it.
Yeah.
So it's
That's
just to show
the
a
part
real
of
world
caring.
example.
That's the idea of caring, having people's back, and going as far as you possibly can to protect them. And they'll turn over backwards for you and jump upside down for you if they understand why and they understand the predicament. They want to be part of the solution. There's another important practice in the book about robust communication. That's an example you're giving of very robust communications where here's the situation we're in. We're all in this together. Give me your ideas, and we're going to get through it together. And otherwise, people know when the organization's in trouble. They can feel it, and if you don't talk to them about it, all it does is engender mistrust.
Absolutely awesome. So you mentioned a bit there, you kind of hinted at it, and I'd like to go back to values and what, so I like values. So I run a mastermind community, and one of the first exercises I get my new members to go through is the leader core values exercise, where they go and they determine their core values as a leader. I would love to hear your take on values, because you did mention on it. So what, how important is it to be to understand and know your values as a caring leader? What are some definitely obvious values as a caring leader? And then anything else you might have to add?
Sure. So it's another chapter in the first part of the book of one of the beliefs that caring leaders have a robust set of values. And, we studied this, and through practice and through research, you can have a long list of values. We picked 9 of them that we think are very important. I ran an organization for a gentleman for 22 years, family-owned organization, big company. And his number one comment or saying or quote always was, if you get the values right, everything else follows. In other words, if you get the values right, everything else is easy. And some of the values are honesty, integrity, resiliency, transparency. And if you can count on people to be honest with you and transparent about what's going on and worry about their safety, and there's 9 of them, if you get those right, you don't have to walk back anything, because what you say is the truth, and there's no underlying message to it. And if you hold yourself to that high standard, it's much easier than not. And so it's critical that people are honest and have integrity and respect for one another. And if you get that right, everything else is easier.
And Scott, I would just add that we're having a lot of discussion in the United States and Canada and throughout the world about, what does identity mean? What does it mean for my personal identity? And I think that the idea of values helps clarify a person's identity and what it means to be a member of a particular organization, or what it means to be a member of a particular military unit. I've had that opportunity to speak at the U.S. Army War College, and that experience is just like, I see what those values are all like in a day in and day out basis. At the university where I work, in my department, we have 3 core values, and I take every opportunity to say, you're different than the other departments, and you're different than a lot of other places, because we value collaboration. So when you value collaboration, there are things you do and things you don't do. And so that becomes a point of identity, but also a point of orientation of how to make decisions and how to move forward. And it gives you a lot of direction to people that sometimes, particularly at a university where students are looking for somebody to guide them on how to behave and how to act. And so the values provide the basis for that.
Gents, I absolutely, fully, and wholeheartedly agree with you. However, this is the thing I often hear, and this is the thing we often hear as leaders or as coaches and consultants, actually, I would suggest, is that how many times have you heard people where they walk in and like, oh yeah, there's our mission and there's our values and stuff like that, but the company culture is actually the opposite or doesn't follow that along whatsoever. So why does that happen in the first place? Why do we even bother to put them up? So, to get a little check off, say, yeah, we've put up the mission, we put up our values up on the wall so people can see them, but, we're going to go this way. Like, why are we at that in the world, and how might the leaders, and actually going to frame this question, the leaders who feel that they're stuck in the middle, right? Because if the CEO, feels like the values are important and that they're up on the wall to make sure, most likely the rest of the company is going to, see that way, at least if they really communicate it and make it a priority. So often you hear the middle managers are like, yes, I believe in them and stuff like this, but then my bosses and my boss's boss do something which are completely contradictory. So how might the middle manager, the one that's stuck in the middle there, still adhere to the values, but at the same time try not to get, basically reprimanded from their supervisors for not, for kind of following them at the same time, if you know what I'm getting at?
Well, exactly know what you're getting at. And that's a huge organizational problem, because it goes back to an idea that we talk about in the book that it's easy to be deceived, but you're the easiest one to deceive. So you might think that you're living by the values that are on the wall if you're the CEO or one of the vice presidents, but that's only your perspective. The perspective that really counts is, do the people feel like they see that you're living the values? That's the test. So are you self-aware enough to find out whether employees think you're living the values at any level, whether you're the top person or a middle level executive or a middle level manager? And then if you yourself are living values, but others in the organization aren't, that's not an excuse for you not to live the values yourself. But the organization has to come to grips with the fact that the environment, the culture, is not coming across to the people like they're honest and respectful and fair and all of those things that are so important. And we need to hold ourselves to a very high standard. We have a graphic in the book that talks about values could be on a continuous gradient scale or a cliff. And what we mean by that is to say, let's take honesty, for example. The two ends of the spectrum are, I'm completely honest or I'm dishonest. But on a gradient, you might say, well, I'm honest most of the time, or I'm honest half of the time, or I'm sometimes honest. When you sit back and evaluate that, that makes absolutely no sense, because how can you be honest half of the time? Because the other half of the time, people are seeing you're not honest. So the standard you have to hold yourself to is, do you represent things honestly from the start all the time or not? And do people see you that way or not? And if the answer to that is no, then you better start making changes to say, okay, the spin and everything else that happens and the stories that go around that aren't quite the truth need to stop, because people will find out immediately. It's a very high standard, but it's the only one that works with values.
Scott, the other piece of it that I think is worth noting is that when you talk about values, you have to be able to ground it in saying, here are particular behaviors that emerge from those values. And if you as a leader, it's one thing for you as yourself to exist, to have that value, but then to point out examples in real time when an employee or a team member is living by those values or not living by those values, that's where you go beyond just full value statements, and it's not real value statements. You get real deep immersion in what happens. So I give you the example from the university. When we have we say we want to have collaborative relationships. Well, if somebody's not collaborating, my role as the lead professor, senior professor, is to make sure that that's happening. And if I see it happening, I'm going to say bravo. And if it's not, then this is something we need to work through. And so it's a coaching opportunity. So the statements on the wall are important. In fact, I help craft them all the time, so I'm not going to be anti-statements on the wall. But the meaning of the statements and the meaning in and day out life is what's crucial for them to have any value at all.
And the living of the statement every day.
Yeah.
What I hear from you guys is how we do anything is how we do everything, and that's kind of how you have to run with your values. I really like the true, telling the truth, right? You can't tell the truth sometimes. You have to tell, to be truthful. You got to tell the truth all the time, right? Pretty much how it rolls. So, and I really like the last bit there about the statements and making sure that you actually live them. And breathe them, right? And that if they're important enough to put up on the wall so everyone sees it, you have to live it and breathe it. Now, as a leader, I will personally tell you, I was doing that. So I commanded a squadron of 200 members and for 2 years, and I was living and breathing it and trying to really, get my people to hone in on the impact that they had and the importance of the mission and stuff like this. But let me tell you, it was exhausting communicating it consistently and constantly. So as leaders out there, like, to me, communication is one of the cornerstones. We have to be able to communicate. So how does a caring leader go about communicating the importance of these values and the importance of the people and so on and so forth effectively?
Well, communication, to be a little bit cute about it, communication is the jet fuel of leadership. You have to do it. You need it all the time, or the plane crashes. If you don't have fuel, the plane crashes. And so it's exhausting. You use the word exhausting to be communicating all the time. Now, the important thing is you can't communicate about everything. You got to communicate about things that matter. And in the book, we talk about two categories of things that we call things that are what's in it for the organization and what's in it for the people. We communicate on two channels, WIFM and what's in it for the WIFO. Most of the time, leaders have a good track record of communicating what's in it for the organization, but they don't translate the message into what's in it for the employee. The example we talked about before on the financial problems with this organization that you mentioned, that's one where he communicated about what's in it for the organization. We don't have any revenue. We need to fix that, and I need your help. And your help is important, is what's in it for the employee. They keep their jobs and they keep being employed by the organization. That's just one of many examples. And we have to communicate about both. And you got to communicate on multiple channels, whether it's presentations or one-on-one communication or group meetings or email, electronic letters, all kinds of different ways. And you need to tell stories. You need to put the message in stories. People remember stories better than they do bullet points on a slide. So multidimensional, multi-channel, and communicating all the time about things that really matter are what's important. And it is exhausting. You have to be up for that.
It's part of the gig you signed up for, right?
Yeah.
But a few things I liked about what you said there. Multidimensional. And I look at multidimensional as in terms that not everyone receives communication the same way. Therefore, you can't expect to push out one form of communication and ensure that everyone has actually received it. It's our jobs as the leaders to make sure that what we're trying to communicate actually gets received on the other end, not for the other person to receive what the leader is saying. It's kind of how I view a point. So the whole multi-dimension thing is super crucial. So, yep, one-on-ones, big group forums. Sometimes the email works, sometimes the chat works, sometimes video conferencing like this works, so on and so forth. But you can't just assume it's going to be a one shot and done per se. And the other thing is, it has to be consistent and basically constant. Like every day, every week, when I was commanding that squadron 200, it was the same message throughout. Tailored to the individuals that I was talking to, because everyone had a different piece of the larger pie, and their little piece was a little bit different. But at the same time, I was talking about the whole pie, but where they came from.
Yeah, I think it's really critical what you just said, because I think there's a bias that we all have. It's like, I like the communication in X form, and I would assume that the people who report to me like it in the same form. And sometimes that's not true. Sometimes some people want it written, sometimes people want it oral, sometimes people want it face to face, sometimes people want it in different formats. And that's why the real challenge for executives, and when I work with them, my specialty and my PhD happens to be in organizational communication, so I have my whole life that's been dedicated to dealing with these kinds of issues. But one of the things I always challenge people to do at the senior level is, can you put the same message into 3 different formats? Can you do it in oral format? Can you do it in written format, words that you use? And can you do a visualization of it? And when Bob and I wrote the book, we kind of challenged ourselves to do that. And can we use multiple ways to signal the same type of thing, because we think it's so important? And so that becomes a really critical skill. And it, in one sense, it makes the communication task exhausting. But in the other sense, if you go back to the value discussion, if you say, look, the values are what I got to get right, then I have to figure out multiple ways to communicate those values that will resonate with everybody. Maybe it doesn't resonate with me personally as a leader, but it resonates with everybody else, so they can in turn amplify those messages and energize the entire organization. And that's where some of those depressing statistics come from, is that we don't do that often enough. You mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast.
And the payoff for this exhaustive communication, extensive communications, is much deeper engagement, because people understand. They know the why. They trust what you're saying because they hear it from the leader all the time. And they get behind the idea that they're here to participate in a big way, and you want them to participate in a big way. That's why it's such a big item of jet fuel for leadership.
Oh, that's awesome. Gentlemen, this has been a fantastic conversation, but all good things come to an end, right? Before we wrap up, I do got a couple last questions for you both. And the first is the question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. And that is, according to you, Bob and Phil, and each take your turn answering this, what makes a great leader?
Well, it's not one thing. It's the 5 beliefs and 9 practices that we talk about in this book. It's things like we've talked about here, the values, the progress. There are other beliefs. It's communication, it's relationships, it's practices that are important. And they need to act in concert with one another to put a style around leadership that shows people that you care about them and you care about the outcomes that they're there to help you get.
And I would say, to kind of echo that, I think that was the question you asked is a deep and profound one. And it's really the one we tried to answer in the book. And I think what we came up with was the basic idea that they're great leaders have this, if you read about them, and I read all these biographies and all this stuff, and I look at the people I admire the most, including Bob, and there's like this core belief set that kind of orients everything. And then once they figure that out, they have a variety of ways over the course of their career of implementing those belief structures so that it becomes infectious to the people they work with. Mm-hmm. And so there's an infection level in a positive sense. I hate to use the word infection in COVID time, post-COVID times, but in a positive sense where it creates an infection that's driven by a deep set of beliefs and a deep set of practices that are linked to those beliefs. And what I think is missing today is the disconnect between those two. That's a long answer to a very profound, difficult question.
It's still a fantastic answer. I've gotten, I asked that question, God knows, 200 and something times now. And I get answers all, completely different. But at the same time, to the core of them, they're still relatively close in that, in the end, people just want to care. to mind the pun. So final question of the show. How can people follow you? How can they find you? Shameless plugs. It's all about you two gentlemen now.
Sure. So we're both on LinkedIn, so you can reach us there. But there's a great website for the book. It's called leadingwithcare.net. Leadingwithcare.net. Talks about the book, talks about us, has some very cool videos that we've done, has a number of other podcasts that we've done. Yours will be there as soon as it's published. We've had some fortunate articles placed in print media with Forbes and Inc. magazine and Investors Business Daily. Those articles are there. So look at the website, leadingwithcare.net. Also, the homepage has a place to order the book. We certainly hope your listeners will do that. It's available on all the major book selling platforms.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. And for the listeners, always, it's easy. Just go to lead.boss.com/253. And the links are all there in the show notes. Gentlemen, again, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules and speaking to us today.
Thank you, Scott. Happy to be with you.
Thank you. Great questions.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.